I've entitled this video Hope for the Best Antennas simply because I think there's a lot of hams who are in a situation where they're not really sure what antenna to put up, and all the antennas that are recommended don't really fit the garden, and you've got neighbour problems or you've got restrictions on what you can put up. So in this short video I'm going to just cover that topic and hopefully give you some idea of how to resolve your antenna situation and use something which I call Hope for the Best Antennas. In this video I want to talk about antennas for difficult locations, or antennas where you've only got a small garden or where you're working on a budget, and antennas which perhaps are not quite the convention but may well be the answer to your particular location. Now, any antenna, any bit of wire will radiate. The trick is actually making it radiate to the best of its ability. Now, we tend to get brought up on the fact that we need a resonant antenna, we need a dipole that's resonant, we need a quarter wave vertical that's resonant. And one of the reasons we want them to be resonant is because we know what the impedance is. We know that a dipole will quite happily work with 50 ohm coax. It's not 50 ohm impedance, but it's give or take a bit. It's around about 60 or 70 ohms, depends on how high it is. But basically, 50 ohms coax cable will work quite happily with your dipole. And we know that a vertical has got a lower impedance. It may be something like that, 25 or 30 ohms. Again, the coax cable, 50 ohm coax cable, gives a reasonable match. And ironically, the higher the earth loss, the better the match, because the earth loss becomes in series with the impedance of the antenna and so raises it a bit. So you can get quite good VSWR with a pretty poor earth. It means to say that the antenna won't radiate so well as it would do with a better earth system, but again, it's an example of make do. And I suppose this video really is a question of how do we make do with what we've got. Now, one of the things that I've often said, and I'll repeat again, make no apology for it, is that when we get our ham radio license, we want to talk to other people. But the be all and end all is not to work somebody at the other end of the world, the opposite side of the world, as good as it may be. The basic principle is that we want to talk to people, we want to experiment, we want to talk to people. And sometimes you see these antennas that give you sort of so-called 5-degree angle of radiation, low angle of radiation, which is really for the Flat Earth Society. We don't actually need that very low angle of radiation to talk to other people. In fact, it can work against us. And sometimes with antennas, you've got to think, look, I've got a small garden. Yes, I've read the books, I know I should do this and I know I should do that, and I know the dipole should be up at 60 feet, but I haven't got a mast that's 60 foot high, and if I did, I wouldn't be allowed to put it up in the garden. So I think we need to lower our aspirations, particularly when we're starting out and particularly when we've got limited space. We want an antenna that enables us to communicate, and we'll enjoy ourselves communicating, whether it be a guy 2 or 3 miles down the road or a guy 50 or 100 or 200 or 300 miles. It doesn't really matter. It's all part of the enjoyment. And very often the distance you cover is dependent on conditions and whether there's a station at 200 or 300 miles away that's on the air and that you can talk to. So let's talk about some basic antennas. Now, first of all, one of the things that prompted this video was I got a note, an email from somebody that got they were living in an apartment and they had a loop antenna on the roof, one of the rather expensive loop antennas I gather, and it worked very well, but, and there was a big but, there were 2 things that were wrong with it. First of all, it's very narrow banded. We know that's the problem with loop antennas, they're very, very narrow banded. These compact loops, whether about 1 or 1.5 meters diameter, they work well, but they have a very limited bandwidth, so you've got to keep tuning them. But in this particular case, what he was finding was he could get a 1-to-1 VSWR, but then all of a sudden it would flip up to 2.5 VSWR. It would go off tune, and I guess there's a mechanical problem with this antenna. Maybe it was RF breakdown, I don't know. But so he asked me, could he put a dipole about 1.5 metres above the roof of his apartment. Now I have to say that his apartment was 20 metres in the air. In other words, I think it was on the 5th story, something like that. So he did have an advantage of height, but a dipole 1.5 metres above the, I think it was a flat roof, I'm assuming it's a flat roof, 1.5 metres above the flat roof. Really, would it work? Well, my answer to that is, there's only one way to find out, is to try it. And the reason I think it's worth trying is because although you've got a flat roof, and I'm guessing this flat roof was built on a steel frame, although you've got a steel frame which you might say is sort of basically an earth in the air, the surrounding area is 20 metres below. In other words, he's got an earth system that projects around the building 20 metres below the antenna. And my guess is that he would get benefit from the height. Even though the antenna was only 1.5 metres above the roof, I suspect he would get quite a lot of benefit from the height of the building above the ground, because the earth system underneath the antenna does play an important part, but so does the earth radiating away from where you're located. That's equally important. So I said to him, it's worth trying. An example perhaps of an antenna that is not very high. Now you might say, okay, well that's fine, but I don't live in an apartment, I live in a house. I've got limitations of what I can do. The neighbours will probably object, or I've got limitations on what I can do anyway. I can't put an antenna up in the air. Well, my answer to that is, well, try something else. Try a low dipole. Now, a dipole, even perhaps 2 metres, 2.5 metres above the ground, is going to radiate. In theory, it will radiate almost vertically. But my guess is, because it's in a domestic environment and there's lots of reflection, my guess is that it will work. And you know, if you've been sitting at home thinking, oh, I don't know what to put out in the garden, I can't do this and I can't do that, try a low dipole. Now, I grant you it's a single band antenna. Dipole's a single band, apart from the 40 metre dipole, which will work on its third harmonic. But basically, for most ham bands, if you put a dipole up, it'll only work on one band. But give it a try, and I think you might be pleasantly surprised. No, you're not going to work as much DX as Joe Bloggs down the road, who's got a 60-foot mast and a 3 or 4 element Yagi and a rotator, etc., etc. But at least when the storms are blowing, you'll be happy in bed knowing that the worst that can happen is your antenna will fall a distance of about 2.5 metres on the ground, and you can put it back up in 5 minutes. And also, it doesn't cost you much at all. In fact, one of the things that I would suggest, if you want to buy wire in bulk, try buying some speaker wire. Speaker wire is pretty cheap, and you get double for your money, because you can pull it apart and you get 2 lengths. So if you're looking for some cheap wire to experiment with, try speaker wire. Now let's talk briefly about that dreaded word VSWR. Again, we're taught that we need to strive for a very low VSWR, because that means to say that we've got a good transfer of power into the antenna, and therefore we're going to get pretty good results. Now, VSWR is important, but it's not the be all and end all. And I'll try to remember to put below this video a table. There's a calculator. There's several calculators actually on the internet, and you can calculate what your power loss is with a particular VSWR, with a particular coax cable and a particular length. And you may be pleasantly surprised. A VSWR of 1.5 to 1 is very commendable, but a VSWR of 2 to 1, although we're taught it's a problem, it's not a problem with the modern day transceiver, because the modern day transceiver has got a matching unit inside, and it will quite happily couple power into the coax cable, even though you see a VSWR of 2 to 1. And even a 3 to 1 VSWR is workable, and dare I say, even a 4 to 1 VSWR is quite workable. I'm not saying that you should ignore the VSWR, but if you can't get it down any lower, then go with it. Your HF transceiver will probably match it okay with the antenna matching unit switched in. Now, one other thing I would say about VSWR is that some of these stations, some of these big stations have got big antennas, and maybe their antennas are out, I don't know, 100 metres, 150 metres down the garden or whatever, and they show the VSWR on their rig as sort of 1.2 to 1. Well, what they're doing is they're showing you what the VSWR is at the transceiver end. But if you've got 100 or 150 metres of coax cable, you're going to get a significant loss. Even with a well-matched antenna, you'll get a significant loss. And that significant loss will actually make the VSWR that you're reading at the station end a lot better than what it really is. And if you really want to check out what the VSWR is, you really need to check the VSWR right at the feed point of the antenna or with a shortish bit of coax cable. If you have a long bit of coax cable, you've got to bear in mind that the VSWR is going to be slightly better or even significantly better at the transceiver end than it really is. And that's because all coax cable has got a loss, and any loss on a coax cable is going to show you a better VSWR. And also, incidentally, what it will show is it will show you a better bandwidth, because the coax loss is there all the time. So if you're moving from low to high and you see that the bandwidth is pretty good, perhaps a bit more than bit better than you expected, it's because you've got a coax loss. And so the VSWR is better at the band edges than what it really should be. In other words, the curve is broader than what you would expect. So don't kid yourself, but it's a fact. Bear it in mind if you're measuring the VSWR at the transceiver end, particularly with a long length of coax cable. Nothing you can do about it, but it's a fact. So let's talk about multiband antennas, because really and truly, if you've got a problem with erection antennas, you've got a small garden or you've got limitations, then you really want an antenna that covers more than one band. I mentioned earlier on in this video an example of a low dipole, but of course it's basically single banded. One of the popular antennas is the Endfed antenna, which has become very popular recently. And if you use an Endfed antenna with a 49 to 1 UNUN, you can then connect coax cable to it, take it straight back to the transceiver, and you'll have multiband performance. And one of the most popular lengths of wire is a 20 metre length of wire, which is a half wave on 40 metres. And that works on its harmonic, so it works not only on the fundamental of 40 metres, it works on 20 metres, 15 metres and 10 metres. And so all you need is a 20 metre length of wire, and you need a 49 to 1 UNUN, and I think if you go on a website we actually do a kit, and that will give you 4-band coverage. Now that end-fed wire can be at a low height, again 2.5, 3 metres above the ground. Even if it's bent around the garden slightly, it doesn't really matter. It will work. And one of the things I've found is on this particular antenna, very often you can also make it work on the 17 metre band, because 17 metres is halfway, roughly halfway between 20 metres and the 15 metre band. And although the impedance at the end will have dropped a bit, it's matchable if you've got an internal matching unit. So if you've got an end-fed antenna that purports to cover 40 metres through to 10 metres, the 4 bands, 40, 20, 15 and 10, you may find that you can also operate it on the 17 metre band if you switch in the antenna matching unit. In fact, you probably want the antenna matching unit switched in anyway, because if you've got the antennas low above the ground, like 2 or 3 metres above the ground, and you've squeezed it into a smallish garden, then you may find that in order to get the best match, you need to use the internal antenna matching unit. So bear that in mind. But let's take a look at a rather controversial antenna, but one that apparently seems to work for some people. And it's particularly relevant if you've got a small garden or you're out portable. And that's the Rybakov antenna, which has got a rather fanciful name, but I think it's Russian for fisherman's rod or something like that. Anyway, it's had a lot of press recently, some bad, some good, but the good ones, or the good press, praise it. And I think it's worth trying. And in fact, I hope to try it fairly soon myself. But I know from all the correspondence I get that a lot of people have found that it works okay. Basically, it's a vertical length of wire, about 7.5 metres length of wire, and it's fed at the base with a 4-to-1 balun. And then you need a few radials at the base in order to make it work, because like any other vertical, it needs something to work against. It needs the other part of the pole. The two-pole vertical basically is two poles. You've got the vertical and you've got the horizontal ground plane. And you need a few radials. Those radials can be any length you like, 2 or 3 metres long. The more the better. I would suggest that the minimum is 4, and if you can get 8 or 12 lengths of wire out as radials laid on the ground, that's better. But basically, it's about 7.5 metres tall, this length of wire. We sell a Spiderbeam telescopic fiberglass antenna, which I think is 7 metres tall. So if you wind the wire around the 7 metre tall pole slightly, then you'll get 7.5 metres on it easily. How does it work? Well, it's very much a compromise. It works on the basis that this vertical length of wire is really not resonant on any particular amateur band, and therefore, in general, on bands from 20 metres through to 10 metres, including the walk bands, it's got a higher impedance than it would have if it was a quarter wave vertical. And if you put in series with it a 4-to-1 balun, then you come, I'll say close, you don't come that close, but you at least approach the sort of medium impedance. The antenna's got a medium impedance in its base, but that varies from band to band. If you put a 4-to-1 on, you'll get a bit closer to what you would if you connected the 50 ohm coax directly to it. In other words, it's got a medium impedance that goes up and down a bit. But it means to say that you should be able to feed power to it on all bands. Now, on 40 metres, probably it's the worst band, but apparently it does work, because I think the impedance on 40 metres will start to drop quite low, and therefore the VSWR will rise. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to put up on the screen now a set of VSWR figures that somebody put up on the internet, the result of using this particular antenna, and you'll see the VSWRs are all over the place. I think the worst one, from memory, and you'll see when you put it on the screen, I think it's up to around about 6-to-1. And you might think, gracious me. Well, before you go any further in thinking, gracious me, do bear in mind two things. First of all, the modern HF transceiver matching unit, or ATU you might want to refer it to, the matching unit will probably match it on those bands, on all the bands. And this means to say that the transceiver will deliver full power into the coax line. Now, you're going to lose power on that coax line for two reasons. First of all, it's the natural loss of that coax exists, so it doesn't matter whether you're feeding a dipole or a Yagi, you're always going to get that loss on that length of coax cable. In a smallish garden, probably it's not going to be much at all, maybe 1.5 dB. And then you're going to get an additional loss because of the VSWR. But if you look at the table, which, as I say, I'm going to put below this video, you may be pleasantly surprised that you don't lose as much as you think. And the good thing is that if you've got a small garden, then you're probably going to have a short length of coax cable. And the shorter the coax cable, the lower loss, and the better the performance will be of the antenna. So it makes it a particularly attractive antenna to try for portable work. You've got an antenna that potentially covers all the bands from 40 metres through to 10 metres. Now, you're not going to work super DX, or at least you're not going to be able to work the same DX or get the same reports as Joe Bloggs down the road with his 3-element Yagi. But this is a hobby. You're into amateur radio because you want to communicate with people. You want to experiment, and it's well worth experimenting, because my guess is that you'll be pleasantly surprised. Now, do remember that if you put a new antenna up, there's two things are going to happen. The band conditions are going to be really good and you'll be amazed how well the antenna works, or the band conditions will be lousy and you'll think it doesn't work at all. Both examples are not typical of what the results you'll get. So always give the antenna at least a month before you make a judgment on it. Conditions at the moment are pretty poor, and if you put an antenna up, you may be giving it the wrong judgment, because conditions are really poor at the moment. You really want to give it at least a month. Generally speaking, there is a sort of a cyclic way that conditions work, as well as the 11-year cycle. There tends to be a sort of a monthly cycle where you find somewhere in the month conditions get fairly good and then they dip down again. So don't judge an antenna on a 24-hour sort of usage. Now, if we're talking about portable antennas, it's always worth trying a short length of coax to a telescopic vertical antenna. A telescopic vertical antenna, by its nature, you can adjust the frequency of it. And there is a whip you can get now, which I think is, 17 foot long. I think we sell them. And you can adjust that length. You can make that a vertical down the garden. And you can adjust the length of that vertical to make it resonant. You'll get a pretty good match. The problem with these telescopic verticals, or these metal telescopic verticals, is they're not all weather. They will work, but they're not designed to be left out in the garden permanently, because they'll just corrode. They're not superbly built for sort of all weather use, but they will work for portable use. Now, I did publish a video several months ago, actually, showing that you can use a mobile whip as a short vertical antenna. Again, you can mount that somewhere in the garden. The mobile whips are much more weatherproof, and you can mount that down the garden and put a few radials, and it works quite well. I've got a 20-metre one which I use as a reference at the moment, and it works extremely well. Now, the examples I've given are not by any means all that is available to you. There's always all sorts of different approaches you can make to antennas, and particularly antennas for small gardens. So if you've got your own ideas or your own antennas that you're using, put details below this video in the comments section, because other viewers of this video channel will read them, and they may be inspired to try the way that you have employed in order to cope with a small garden, antenna in a small garden. So many thanks for your support on this channel. It's much appreciated. Don't forget, we've got a wide range of products on our website, all sorts of accessories, and of course mainline products as well. I think the Yaesu cashback is about to end, but we've got some great deals at the moment on our website, package deals, or bundles we call them. I think from memory we're doing a great deal on the Yaesu FT710 AESS, where I think you get a free power supply. The ICOM IC7300 is now down to, I think, $999, and again I think we're doing a free power supply. But if you want to get the latest news, go onto our website, or if you've got a part exchange, you want to do a deal, then pick up the phone and speak to one of the guys in the sales department. They'll be more than happy to quote you a deal, and we're doing some great part exchange deals at the moment. So there we are. Thanks for your support. Don't forget to press the subscribe button if you're keen on being informed of when the next video is coming up, which is usually in the next few days. In the meantime, you enjoy ham radio, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.